Today's video is on a few subjects that I think are more important than the average video I do. It's all about impactful information revolving around, but really much more than the 6500 XT. Volume, availability, MSRP, if it will actually be at MSRP, and really this is more of an instruction on what to expect out of PC gaming hardware in the do-it-yourself market in the coming months and even the coming years. Because of how much bigger the scope got for this video, I took my time with the information I had. And that's because I wanted to make sure I got the messaging right regarding the 6500 XT and other products launching around it for a few reasons. Number one, there's a narrative going around on Reddit about the 6500 XT that I believe is completely misguided and poisoned the waters of rational discussion to the point that most people that should be looking to get this card because it is the best decision for them have been dissuaded from listening to reason. So I had to make sure that what I said was well thought out, so I addressed what can only be very real concerns people have about this graphics card. And number two, I really wanted to take my time to make sure people understood more than just the 6500 XT, but what's going on with this market. Because number three, this market is changing permanently in its pricing structures, what it costs to make something, and what financially makes sense to even make as a product anymore. I think a lot of people are complaining about the wrong things. Although, honestly, there is one product people are complaining about that I don't think is misguided, and that's the RTX 3080 12GB. Now, me and other tech tubers have already done videos talking about the problems with the RTX 3080 12GB. I'm not going to dwell on performance or how they manipulated reviewers too much. I just want to hone in on one main point. First, the 2060 12GB, now the 3080 12GB, and based on people I've talked to, quite possibly the 3090 Ti as well, whenever it ends up coming out. God knows that it might be delayed a bit, but the point is this. These are three different graphics cards in a row that might not have a Founders Edition and that might not receive an MSRP. And with the 2060, it was like, whatever, that graphics card is for minors. But otherwise, though, this is three cards in a row where NVIDIA has not given the cards pricing. And there's a lot of people that will say MSRP doesn't matter, but as I'll get to later in this video, MSRP is a real thing. It is calculations a company does where they estimate what you can sell a card for after going through shipping and a few middlemen to be a realistic price consumers can expect. Without that, that does make a big difference in what these cards are priced at. And all I have to say is three cards in a row from NVIDIA, where NVIDIA doesn't tell people what to expect in pricing and tries to muddle performance. Is Lovelace going to have an MSRP? Probably, but this is three cards in a row, potentially, where they haven't given MSRP and have messed with the review day. That is very alarming. That is very anti-consumer, and that makes me worry about the RTX 4000 series. Because, let's be honest, what NVIDIA is trying to do is launch products where the consumers don't know how they perform, don't know what they should cost, and that is an anti-consumer dream world for Jensen Huang. And I'm really worried about that becoming a standard reality from that company. That is anti-consumer. The 6500 XT is not anti-consumer, and there's a lot more about its production costs and its very high availability that I think people need to understand before they just completely write off this graphics card. And I'm going to get into all of that in a lot of detail, but first, an ad from a sponsor. Today's video is brought to you by, that's right, Micro Center. Honestly, where do I even start with this sponsor? I mean, half of the stuff I've gotten over the past 20 years has come from them. Whether this R9 Nano I got for a steal for my little cousin for her first PC, or the 390X 8GB. That was my first 8GB graphics card, and I loved it. And all of these things came from Micro Center because, well, they easily have the best deals on enthusiast PC parts, and they have a laughably better selection than really any other brick and mortar store. And they're always adding new features as well, like they just partnered with Asus to help you build a desktop easily online. Each base system comes with motherboard, case, power supply, graphics card, everything you need, and then you can customize it as you see fit and pick it up the same day or have them build it for an extra fee. It really is worth checking if there's a Micro Center near you in the United States, because if it is, it's worth going out of your way even a little bit to get your parts there, because it's just the best place to get PC parts. And in fact, there's more. Right now, Micro Center is offering new shoppers and fans of Moore's Law at a special deal for a free solid state drive. Use the links in the description. Get this free solid state drive to help Moore's Law is Dead, to help you get an essential component free, and to save yourself some money. Use Micro Center today. So moving on from NVIDIA, let's talk about AMD. Let's talk about the 6500 XT, a product that really isn't anti-consumer. It's a unfortunate product of the world we live in. And I'll get to some of the pricing stuff, but first I actually want to talk about performance, because I think this is the thing probably being the most misquoted and misunderstood by people. It's not an RX 480. It's not even an RX 580. AMD's own chart suggests something maybe a hair below an RX 590 in 1080p, which means probably on average 5% better than a 5500 XT, or at least trading blows with that, which is certainly notably stronger than a 480. But okay, we can't just blindly accept the information they put on their charts, whether it's Intel, NVIDIA, or AMD. So let's look at the specs and see what they suggest. The first thing that I would highlight with its specs is that RDNA architectures typically have about 50% more performance than GCN architectures per teraflops in gaming. Now, AMD's talked publicly in many interviews before about the performance differences, IPC differences, per teraflop differences between RDNA and GCN architectures, and I would usually just quote those in previous videos, but in this one, I actually think it would just be a lot easier to give you real-world examples. So anyways, Vega 56 here, and I'm going to use Tech Power Up. It's a rough guide, but I find lately they're fairly accurate in their differences between graphics card performance. So yeah, 10.5 teraflops. Okay, so let's see, Vega 56. All right, so what's roughly 50% stronger than that? Oh, the 6600 XT that has how many teraflops? 10.6, close enough. And then let's take another example. Why not just use Vega 64? I actually have to use some of the higher end GCN because anything else is just too weak to compare at this point. But if I go down and look at the teraflops of this graphics card, we've got 12.6. Okay, so what roughly has, I don't know, something close to 13 teraflops? What would probably be there? Well, if we look at the 6700 XT, that's about 50% better. And it has, let's see, where is it? Oh, slightly more teraflops, slightly over 50% better than a Vega 64. So when you look at the RX 590, that has how many teraflops then? Let us see, 7.1. And the 5500 XT had, let's see, 5.2. And it just about lost to the 590. And so, yeah, this method isn't perfect down to a percentage point, but it's fairly close to the rough range AMD presented to us, which is to say a bit stronger than a 5500 XT, but probably a bit all over the place because of its lopsided design. And actually, I do think I can fairly accurately tell you where the 6500 XT should yo-yo between, like roughly where its best and worst case performance should lie, after discovering something curious on AMD's website. If you go to the 6500 XT page, AMD apparently felt the need to say the effective bandwidth of the graphics card, and this is something they curiously do not have for the 6600 XT nor the 6900 XT on their pages, at least last time I checked as of making this video. Clearly, they are sensitive to how weak they're worried people may think the 6500 XT is, and so they put a bigger bandwidth number to try to make people feel better about themselves. But anyways, this is something that you can actually find on some reviews and in some spec sheets, where Navi 23, for example, hit. And I think the takeaway for it is most of these Navi dies have enough infinity cache for their given resolution to make bandwidth not an issue, despite usually having a bus pretty much half as big as the previous generation per the performance tier. And so let's just run with this though. I made this chart here, and I'm just going to assume that this card performs 50% better per teraflop compared to GCN. Heck, I'll just make it 45% to be safe. And again, remember that RDNA 1 doesn't have really any less IPC per teraflop. I know that's an imperfect term, but I think you guys get what I mean. Gaming teraflops and performance is basically the same between RDNA 1 and RDNA 2. But RDNA 2 clocks way higher and has access to infinity cache, which RDNA 1 never had. Anyway, so if we look at this chart, you can see that at its best, when Infinity Cache is being fully utilized and it's getting as many cache hit rates as it can, the 6500 XT should actually beat the 590 and just about match a 1660. And I'm sure there will be a few outliers in low resolutions where it does massively overperform our expectations, or most people's expectations, maybe not my own. But there will also admittedly be some outliers where it performs a lot like an RX 480, especially above 1080p. And I want to be clear, the only raw bandwidth column is a bit misleading. There's no situation where it's not getting a boost from the Infinity Cache. Like if you look at AMD's own chart of Infinity Cache for resolution, you can see that at a certain point, you just get like a 33% boost from the theoretical max boost you could get from the Infinity Cache. And so basically, again, what am I saying? I don't really see this losing to the 480. I think this will be very rare for that to ever happen. This card, honestly, then, it sounds like a cherry picker's dream. I actually reached out to an AMD source, and this person told me that, yeah, it's gonna be all over the place, beating the 5500 XT by double digits at times, and other times underperforming expectations. So basically, what this means is if you're looking to get a 6500 XT, it is not a 480 released again. It's not a 580 either. AMD is probably pushing this a bit out of its comfort zone, though, when it comes to the Infinity Cache, right? If I had to guess, this card is perfect as a 1080p low or 900p high settings card, one or the other. But AMD understands that if they showed 900p on a presentation, people would laugh them off the stage. And so it's probably a little bit outside of its efficiency comfort zone, but that does mean that at 900p or lower, it's probably as strong as a 1660. And at above 1080p, it's probably about a 480. And compared to its competition, that means it's unlikely to ever really trade blows with the 3050, but it shouldn't be more than 25% behind it, while costing 20% less and likely actually being buyable near MSRP, unlike the 3050, which I have a lot more to say about the pricing of this graphics card, but first I actually want to talk about supply. It's universal amongst my most trusted sources. AMD is making magnitudes more of this card than they were the 6600 XT. They clearly diverted this little 107mm square die from laptop to desktop and overclocked the crap out of it because they just saw an opening to attempt to satisfy demand a little bit. So I know it's not something special in terms of raw performance, but think of how efficient it is in pure gaming for die space. The 6600 XT slightly outperforms the 5700 XT on the same node, 7nm P, with a 6% smaller die size. Well, this matches the 5500 XT with 33% less die space used. And so, yeah, AMD can, and they are, making a ton of these. And that means, remember that 6600 XT launch where you had almost a whole day to get the 6600 XT near MSRP in the US? That was a day where I woke up, hours after it had launched, expecting it to not be available, despite hearing there was a lot of supply. And at local stores, it was still in stock at MSRP, or maybe $20 more. They're going to supply probably twice as many 6500 XTs in its first month of sales than the 6600 XT was supplied, and the 6500 XT isn't good at mining. This is a real opportunity for people who need to replace an old graphics card or sell their old one for a better deal, should jump on. It truly is. Although I do have some caveats to the availability, unfortunately. As of about 48 hours before I recorded this, I was excited to talk about the high availability and how easy it would be to get these graphics cards, and I do think it will be easier in the first month of sales than the 6600 XT was. But honestly, I'm getting a lot of reports of massive shipping issues. And so it's hard for me to 100% confident in the precise statements I was hoping to make. But I guess all that means is I need to rephrase them. Here's what I can say about the 6500 XT's volume at launch. It is going to be supplied at substantially higher numbers than the 6600 XT in its first month of sales. In other words, I would expect double the 6500 XTs to land in America at the very least by mid-February than the 6600 XT had in all of October of last year. Although I do suspect, from the sounds of it, about a third of these are going to OEMs, and so the initial launch may be a little confusing. And I think about half of the volume is going to come after the first 48 hours because I'm getting constant reports of shipping delays. And most of these sources say it's not that they don't think a lot are coming, it's that shipping is becoming so unpredictable right now. And so I guess what I'm saying overall, you'll have to keep your ear to the ground. You'll have to pay attention for more than just the first 2 days of launch with the 6500 XT, but it's a very good chance you'll be able to get one for under $250 instead of the shameful $1,650 for over $300 in the first month of sales. Which brings me to one of the final points of this video, and it's one I'm not seeing enough people make, and it's this. I know the market sucks right now, but at a certain point, a lot of you people complaining need to accept that you're not as powerless as you think. How many times do you need to be told there will be products you can get, briefly at least, at MSRP and then sell out, but if you get them on time, you can sell your old card on eBay for the same price or more? No, I don't expect anyone with an RX 480 or anything remotely around that card to be excited about getting a 6500 XT for $200 or even $250 if that's what you end up getting it for. But look at how the RX 470 4GB or 970 are selling for over $200 often. These are weaker than the 6500 XT, while lacking a lot of newer features, using more energy, and most importantly, the 6500 XT, it'll be a new card if you get it. It's not going to break any day now, like your old 970 gasping dust out the back of your computer every minute. And I also know that more people than you hear about have something like a GTX 1050 Ti or an RX 560 4GB that they can sell for almost $200 on eBay right now. And you would be a moron to not try to get the 6500 XT new and sell your old card before it breaks, especially when I am getting reports that after Q1, all of these shipping issues might get even worse, and there might be a whole quarter or two of not being able to get anything. This is, like I said during the 6600 XT launch videos, maybe your last chance for a little bit to make sure you have a card that won't break over the next month. Don't miss it. And then I finally come to my final point I need to make in this video, and it's something that isn't a happy one, but is the most important one. But I couldn't get to, I didn't think, until I got through everything else first. And that quote I just showed about a source of mine saying that pricing is going to go back up eventually, it's because right now these cards really do cost more than they used to make. Now, people would be good to remember that all of that infamous stuff I said about the Ampere launch that turned out to be true, that came from having access to actual BOM costs. And so when I show this chart here to illustrate my point, let us start with the RTX 3080, because a lot of my information is extrapolated from this and then influenced by discussions with sources, AIBs, and people that actually price out these graphics cards. But you need to understand like what happened with the 3080, right? So the silicon, yeah, it costs more than these tiny dies here, even though Samsung's charging way less for their wafers than TSMC, but it's still a small part of the overall cost once you have a graphics card costing hundreds of dollars. Its board design was very elaborate, and it required very good VRMs to not fry itself, and sometimes they still do, you know. So, yeah, I mean, back then, this was about the silicon cost, the board, VRM, everything else, and then there was the VRAM cost that NVIDIA bundles with these components because they can buy them in bulk in ways AIBs can't and allocate them to their AIBs accordingly. You know, if NVIDIA took a 60% markup, which they usually do, this is about the price it gets to. And then most AIBs were putting huge, beefy, expensive coolers, about $100 is what I was told, and shipping back then was about $10, and AIBs want a 10% cut. Yeah, so that is why at launch it was over $800 per card. And also that's why you didn't see NVIDIA make almost any Founders cards. I know, you're going to see a couple people in the comments saying, I got one. Yeah, well, that's not even 5% of the production. You see, the cooler and the board on the founder's card were even more expensive and elaborate. And so add like $50 to this, as Igor's Labs covered, and add a bit more, probably another like 20, $50 to this. And you can start to see where, yeah, because NVIDIA doesn't have an AIB markup, they're making money on each card sold, but not as much as they want to. That's why NVIDIA did all of the fake MSRP shenanigans. All right. And then if we go over to the 5500 XT, yep, this is what the silicon costs back then. This is what the board costs. I've verified this with people. You know, RAM was way cheaper back then than it is right now. You know, there's like a 45% Lisa Sue tax, as we used to call it. That was the cost of a decent cooler, was only $10 actually. And you get to, well, about $170. And I did this separately from looking up the MSRP. It's actually hilarious how close it comes to it. You can see why AMD priced the 5500 XT with 4 gigabytes at a $170 MSRP. That was an actual calculation they did, estimating what it will cost on the market, right? Okay, so here's where it gets depressing. The silicon's cheaper. It's an even smaller die. And normally the board in the VRM would cost less than this. It does use less energy. It is smaller. But I am told that these components are up 50% in price still. So despite this usually costing less than this, it's actually more. And RAM costs are still double what they used to be, based on what I am told, or at least close to double what they used to be, not quite double. And so that's where you get actually more cost in RAM for this. And then an AMD markup that's less than 45%. I'm told cooler costs used to be below $10 for what these will get, but now it's closer to $15. And then we have the fact that shipping costs based on multiple AIBs I've talked to are up to $19,000 per shipping container, over 6x in cost. Now, used to be that you know, $5 for shipping is what you'd expect. And all right, you can make a decent profit. It's not negligible, but it's not a big part of the cost. The second these cards cost $30 to ship via boat, before the AIB markup, and even with AMD taking a smaller cut than usual, it's barely at that MSRP. But this is an MSRP thinks they can maybe hold if shortages get better in the future. And right now I'm told they are doing some things to keep the pricing low during the first month of sales. But basically, what am I saying? This card is not going to usually be $200 for the first few months it is out after that first month of sales. And it'll be luck if it ever comes back down to that. In fact, if we adjust for shortages getting better, it's a little more depressing even. Let me see here. So yeah, I'm basically assuming with this chart here that 20% inflation on a lot of these components is here to stay, and that shipping will be twice as expensive as it used to be for at least a year, which I think is conservative. You still get to a point, if we go back to AMD's usual Lisa Sue tax and a standard AIB markup, where they're not making any more money than usual if this was about a $170 card. And I know that's depressing. I know. I'm not here to defend these companies. I'm here to tell you the truth. Breaking down the costs relative to previous launches, accounting for increased shipping costs, increased components costs, and inflation, which I think 20% inflation from where things were a couple years ago is just here to stay, even if things get better. I'm sorry, but the $200 market is looking dead unless someone is willing to sell their products at a loss, which maybe Intel will. I think they actually might. But that means that when you see products that are even remotely okay at below $200, then you kind of want to jump on it, because this is a market that financially doesn't make any sense to service anymore at a level I didn't even realize until I really dug into it with some sources and did the math. And I know that's depressing to acknowledge, but it is the facts. And hopefully if you've watched this whole video, you're walking away armed with the correct facts to make an informed adult decision about the 6500 XT around its launch. It is not weaker than a 480. It's basically keeping the performance status quo at $200, except stronger in some scenarios. And while that's not that exciting, it is a market that's going to disappear within a couple years, I believe. Even if we have $300 graphics cards, way stronger than what we used to have, I believe the $200 market is something that's almost going to be permanently gone, because, well, inflation is here and that market is very hard to service anymore unless you go with crazy cheap components, and that's not going to happen that often. So You know what? Do whatever the hell you want. I don't care how many people just sit around whining and holding on to a 1050 Ti when they've been given better options. You're not smart for ignoring this. You're just punishing yourself, but you're free to do whatever you want. But what does annoy me, and the note I want to end on, is acting like AMD is a bad guy for trying to service a market they almost lose money on by servicing, okay? And the truth is, they're not a good guy. They're doing this for financial reasons. They know that they haven't gained the market share they wanted to with RDNA 2, and they need to do something desperate to try to keep it, and that's making less money on a low-end card that almost doesn't make sense to make anymore. So it's not like they're a charity. They're not a good guy, but I do know who's definitely a bad guy right now, and it's not the company trying to service a low-end market. It's the company removing official pricing and fucking with reviewers on release day. And what really concerns me is how much of this community can't tell the difference between the maliciousness of these practices. But hopefully, if you watch this video, you can tell the difference. Well then, I hope you enjoyed this video. It was quite a lot of research and quite a lot of work, and it's about some subjects that aren't as clickable for clickbait, but I think it's important, and so I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you will share it and tell people and try to put out some of this misinformation going on, because the fact of the matter is understanding the truths from this video, I think, wakes people up to how the PC gaming market is just changing, and changing permanently after the past few years. Bunch of world events. But yeah, I guess the final thing I will say is I'm also hearing things like DDR5 pricing may go to crap over the next few months as well. In fact, I'm hearing so many manufacturers say that due to shipping and just other black swan events happening at factories, that honestly, this month, January, is going to be a little better than average to get some components. But over February and March, it may even get worse before it gets better. And it will get better by the end of the year, but that basically right now is kind of the time to buy, unfortunately, even if it's not where we want it to be. So final warning on that. In addition to the final warnings in this video, I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please check that you've subscribed to the Moore's Law is Dead YouTube channel and ring the bell button. Also, please consider supporting us on Patreon. We cannot do this without our patrons. A new patron exclusive podcast, Die Shrink 63, is out right now if you want to listen to that. And there's so many more ad-free and exclusive pieces of content dropping every week to our patrons. You can ask me and guest questions. There's so much there. There's a community to discover if you support us. We can't do this without our patrons. But otherwise, to everyone else, thank you for watching.